The Federal Reserve Act, Part 3. The Federal Reserve Board. Section 10. A Federal Reserve Board is hereby created, which shall consist of 7 members, including the Secretary of the Treasury and the Comptroller of the Currency, who shall be members ex officio, and 5 members appointed by the President of the United States, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, in selecting the 5 appointed members of the Federal Reserve Board, not more than one of whom shall be selected from any one Federal Reserve District. The President shall have due regard to a fair representation of the different commercial, industrial, and geographical divisions of the country. The 5 members of the Federal Reserve Board appointed by the President and confirmed as aforesaid shall devote their entire time to the business of the Federal Reserve Board, and shall each receive an annual salary of $12,000 payable monthly together with actual necessary traveling expenses, and the Comptroller of the Currency, as ex officio member of the Federal Reserve Board, shall, in addition to the salary now paid him as Comptroller of the Currency, receive the sum of $7,000 annually for his service as a member of said board. The members of said board, the Secretary of the Treasury, the Assistant Secretaries of the Treasury, and the Comptroller of the Currency, shall be ineligible during the time they are in office, and for 2 years thereafter to hold any office, position, or employment in any member bank. Of the 5 members thus appointed by the President, at least 2 shall be persons experienced in banking or finance. 1 shall be designated by the President to serve for 2, 1 for 4, 1 for 6, 1 for 8, and 1 for 10 years, and therefore each member so appointed shall serve for a term of 10 years, unless sooner removed for cause by the President. Of the 5 persons thus appointed, 1 shall be designated by the President as Governor, and 1 as Vice Governor of the Federal Reserve Board. The Governor of the Federal Reserve Board, subject to its supervision, shall be the active executive officer. The Secretary of the Treasury may assign offices in the Department of the Treasury for the use of the Federal Reserve Board. Each member of the Federal Reserve Board shall within 15 days after notice of appointment make and subscribe to the oath of office. The Federal Reserve Board shall have the power to levy semi-annually upon the Federal Reserve banks, in proportion to their capital stock and surplus, an assessment sufficient to pay its estimated expenses and the salaries of its members and employees for the half-year succeeding the levying of such assessment, together with any deficit carried forward from the preceding half-year. The first meeting of the Federal Reserve Board shall be held in Washington, District of Columbia, as soon as may be after the passage of this act, at a date to be fixed by the Reserve Bank Organization Committee. The Secretary of the Treasury shall be ex officio chairman of the Federal Reserve Board. No member of the Federal Reserve Board shall be an officer or director of any bank, banking institution, trust company, or Federal Reserve Bank, nor hold stock in any bank, banking institution, or trust company, and before entering upon his duties as a member of the Federal Reserve Board, he shall certify under oath to the Secretary of the Treasury that he has complied with this requirement. Whenever a vacancy shall occur, other than by the expiration of term, among the 5 members of the Federal Reserve Board appointed by the President, as above provided, a successor shall be appointed by the President, with the advice and consent of the Senate, to fill such vacancy, and when appointed, he shall hold office for the unexpired term of the member whose place he is selected to fill. The President shall have the power to fill all vacancies that may happen on the Federal Reserve Board during the recess of the Senate, by granting commissions which shall expire 30 days after the next session of the Senate convenes. Nothing in this act contained shall be construed as taking away any powers heretofore vested by law in the Secretary of the Treasury, which relate to the supervision, management, and control of the Treasury Department and bureaus under such department, and wherever any power vested by this act in the Federal Reserve Board or the Federal Reserve agent appears to conflict with the powers of the Secretary of the Treasury, such power shall be exercised subject to the supervision and control of the Secretary. The Federal Reserve Board shall annually make a full report of its operations to the Speaker of the House of Representatives, who shall cause the same to be printed for the information of the Congress. Section 324 of the Revised Statutes of the United States shall be amended so as to read as follows. There shall be in the Department of the Treasury a bureau charged with the execution of all laws passed by Congress relating to the issue and regulation of national currency secured by the United States bonds, and, under the general supervision of the Federal Reserve Board, of all Federal Reserve notes, the chief officer of which bureau shall be called the Comptroller of the Currency, and shall perform his duties under the general directions of the Secretary of the Treasury. Section 11. The Federal Reserve Board shall be authorized and empowered a. To examine at its discretion the accounts, books, and affairs of each Federal Reserve Bank and of each member bank, and to require such statements and reports as it may deem necessary. The said board shall publish once each week a statement showing the condition of each Federal Reserve Bank and a consolidated statement for all Federal Reserve Banks. Such statement shall show in detail the assets and liabilities of the Federal Reserve Banks, single and combined, and shall furnish full information regarding the character of the money held as reserve and the amount, nature, and maturities of the paper and other investments owned or held by Federal Reserve Banks. B. To permit, or on the affirmative vote of at least 5 members of the Reserve Board, to require Federal Reserve Banks to rediscount the discounted paper of other Federal Reserve Banks at rates of interest to be fixed by the Federal Reserve Board. C. To suspend for a period not exceeding 30 days, and from time to time renew such suspension for periods not exceeding 15 days, any reserve requirement specified in this Act, provided that it shall establish a graduated tax upon the amounts by which the reserve requirements of this Act may be permitted to fall below the level hereinafter specified, and provided further that when the gold reserve held against Federal Reserve notes fall below 40 percentum, the Federal Reserve Board shall establish a graduated tax of not more than 1 percentum per annum upon such deficiency until the reserve fall to 32 1/2 percentum, and when said reserve falls below 32 1/2 percentum, a tax at the rate increasingly of not less than 1 1/2 percentum per annum upon each 2 1/2 percentum. The tax shall be paid by the Reserve Bank, but the Reserve Bank shall add an amount equal to said tax to the rates of interest and discount fixed by the Federal Reserve Board. D. To supervise and regulate through the Bureau under the charge of the Comptroller of the Currency the issue and retirement of Federal Reserve notes, and to prescribe rules and regulations under which such notes may be delivered by the Comptroller to the Federal Reserve agents applying therefor. E. To add to the number of cities classified as Reserve and Central Reserve cities under existing law in which national banking associations are subject to the reserve requirements set forth in Section 20 of this Act, or to reclassify existing Reserve and Central Reserve cities, or to terminate their designation as such. F. To suspend or remove any officer or director of any Federal Reserve Bank, the cause of such removal to be forthwith communicated in writing by the Federal Reserve Board to the removed officer or director and to said bank. G. To require the writing off of doubtful or worthless assets upon the books and balance sheets of Federal Reserve banks. H. To suspend, for the violation of any of the provisions of this Act, the operations of any Federal Reserve Bank, to take possession thereof, administer the same during the period of suspension, and, when deemed advisable, to liquidate or reorganize such bank. I. To require bonds of Federal Reserve agents to make regulations for the safeguarding of all collateral, bonds, Federal Reserve notes, money, or property of any kind deposited in the hands of such agents, and said board shall perform the duties, functions, or services specified in this Act, and make all rules and regulations necessary to enable said board effectively to perform the same. J. To exercise general supervision over said Federal Reserve banks. K. To grant by special permit to national banks applying therefor, when not in contravention of state or local law, the right to act as trustee, executor, administrator, or registrar of stocks and bonds under such rules and regulations as the said board may prescribe. L. To employ such attorneys, experts, assistants, clerks, or other employees as may be deemed necessary to conduct the business of the board. All salaries and fees shall be fixed in advance by said board and shall be paid in the same manner as the salaries of the members of said board. All such attorneys, experts, assistants, clerks, and other employees shall be appointed without regard to the provisions of the Act of January 16, 1883, Volume 22, United States Statutes at Large, page 403, and amendments thereto, or any rule or regulation made in pursuance thereof, provided that nothing herein shall prevent the President from placing said employees in the classified service.